The autumn rain drummed against the tall windows of Buckingham Palace as King Charles stood in his private study, holding a letter that would change everything. His hands trembled slightly as he read the words for the third time. The letter was from his doctor, and the news was not what anyone had hoped for. "Your Majesty," the letter began, "after reviewing all the test results, I must inform you that your condition has progressed more rapidly than we anticipated. The treatment will require intensive care and complete rest. Any stress or emotional burden could worsen your situation significantly." Charles set the letter down on his mahogany desk and walked to the window. Outside, he could see the tourists gathering despite the rain, hoping to catch a glimpse of royal life. They had no idea what was happening behind these ancient walls. For months, Charles had been dealing with health issues that the palace had kept secret from the public. Only a few trusted advisors and family members knew the truth. The door opened softly and Camilla entered the room. She wore a simple blue dress and carried a cup of tea, just as she had done every afternoon for the past 20 years. Her face showed concern as she noticed the letter on the desk. "Charles, what did the doctor say?" she asked, setting the tea down beside him. He turned to face his wife, the woman who had stood by him through scandals, criticism, and the long wait to become king. Her eyes were full of love and worry. This made what he had to do even harder. "Camilla, we need to talk," he said, his voice heavy with emotion. She sat down in the chair across from his desk, the same chair where they had discussed so many important decisions together. The room felt different now, charged with an energy that made her nervous. "The doctors say my condition is getting worse," Charles began. "They've recommended complete rest and isolation from any stress. The palace advisors have been meeting all week and they've come to a conclusion that He paused, struggling with the words. "What conclusion, Charles?" Camilla's voice was barely a whisper. "They believe that my illness might be connected to the constant pressure and criticism we face as a couple, the newspapers, the public opinion, the endless scrutiny of our relationship. They think that for my health, for the good of the monarchy, we should—" He couldn't finish the sentence. Camilla's face went pale. She had suspected this conversation might come, but hearing it made her heart sink. "They want me to leave," she said, not as a question, but as a statement of fact. Charles nodded slowly. "The palace advisors say it would be temporary, just until my health improves. They've arranged for you to stay at Highgrove House away from the public eye. They believe that if the press thinks we're having difficulties, it will reduce the pressure on both of us." The silence in the room was deafening. Outside, the rain continued to fall, and somewhere in the palace, staff members went about their daily duties, unaware that the royal couple's world was falling apart. "How long?" Camilla asked, her voice steady despite the tears forming in her eyes. "They don't know. Months, maybe longer. The doctors say I need to focus entirely on my treatment without any distractions or emotional stress." Camilla stood up and walked to the same window where Charles had been standing. She watched the tourists below, people who saw their love story as either a fairy tale or a scandal depending on their perspective. None of them knew the real story. The quiet moments, the shared laughter, the way Charles hummed while he gardened, or how she always made sure his tea was the perfect temperature. "I understand," she said finally, though her heart was breaking. "No, you don't understand," Charles said, moving to stand beside her. "This isn't what I want. This is what everyone else thinks is best. The advisors, the doctors, even some family members, they all believe that our relationship is somehow making everything worse." "And what do you believe?" Camilla asked, turning to look at him. Charles was quiet for a long moment. "I believe that losing you would be worse than any illness. But I also know that if something happens to me because I was stubborn about this, I could never forgive myself, and neither could you." They stood together by the window, watching the world outside continue as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. In a few days, Camilla would pack her belongings and leave the palace that had become her home. She would tell the staff that she was taking a brief holiday, and Charles would continue his royal duties while secretly battling his illness. "Will you visit?" she asked. "I don't think they'll allow it, at least not at first. They want a complete separation to see if it helps. And if it doesn't help?" Charles took her hand in his. "Then we'll figure out another way. This isn't forever, Camilla. I promise you that." But as they stood there together, both of them wondered if this promise was one that Charles would be able to keep. The palace had its own way of making temporary situations permanent, and once Camilla left, there would be many people who would prefer she never return. That evening, as they shared what might be their last dinner together for many months. Neither Charles nor Camilla spoke about the future. Instead, they talked about their garden at Highgrove, about books they had read, about anything except the fact that their life together was about to be put on hold. The palace staff noticed that the king seemed quieter than usual, and the queen consort spent a long time looking out windows. But no one suspected that in just 3 days everything would change. The official announcement would be simple. Queen consort Camilla would be taking a private retreat for personal reflection. What the public wouldn't know was that this retreat was not her choice, and that the king's heart was breaking as much as hers. The palace would get its wish for reduced pressure, but at a cost that might prove higher than anyone anticipated. The black car pulled away from Buckingham Palace at dawn, carrying Camilla toward Highgrove House. She sat in the back seat, watching London wake up through tinted windows. Street cleaners swept the sidewalks, early commuters hurried to work, and life continued normally for everyone except her. Charles had not come to see her off. They had said their goodbyes the night before in the privacy of their bedroom, away from the watching eyes of palace staff. He had held her hand and promised again that this separation was temporary, but his eyes told a different story. They both knew that once she left, powerful forces would work to keep them apart. At Highgrove House, the staff welcomed her with the same warmth they always had, but something felt different. This place, which had always been their peaceful retreat from royal duties, now felt like a prison. The beautiful gardens that she and Charles had planned together seemed to mock her with their memories. Mrs. Patterson, the head housekeeper, showed her to the main bedroom. "Will His Majesty be joining you soon, Your Majesty?" she asked with a hopeful smile. "Not for a while," Camilla replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "He has many important duties at the palace." That first week passed slowly. Camilla tried to keep herself busy by reading, tending to the gardens, and taking long walks through the countryside. But every activity reminded her of Charles. She would catch herself setting 2 cups for tea before remembering she was alone. She would turn to share a thought with him, only to find empty space. Meanwhile, at Buckingham Palace, Charles was discovering that the isolation was not helping his condition as the doctors had hoped. If anything, he felt worse. The stress of being separated from Camilla was greater than any pressure they had faced together. He found himself staring at his phone, wanting to call her but knowing that the palace advisors were monitoring his communications. "Your Majesty seems distracted during meetings," observed Sir Gerald Whitmore, his private secretary, during their morning briefing. "Perhaps the separation is already showing positive effects on your stress levels." Charles looked at the man sharply. "I would hardly call feeling miserable a positive effect." "But Your Majesty, the doctors said that emotional attachments could be interfering with your recovery. Perhaps this proves that some distance was necessary." "What it proves," Charles said coldly, "is that happiness and love are not weaknesses to be eliminated. They are strengths that help us heal." Sir Gerald said nothing more, but Charles could see the disapproval in his eyes. The palace advisors had never truly accepted Camilla, and they saw this separation as an opportunity to make it permanent. Back at Highgrove, Camilla was having her own difficult conversations. Lady Morrison, one of the senior palace advisors, had come to visit with what she called suggestions for moving forward. "Your Majesty," Lady Morrison said as they sat in the drawing room, "this time apart could be an opportunity for you to develop your own independent identity. There are many charitable causes that could benefit from your attention, activities that don't require the king's presence." Camilla set down her teacup carefully. "Are you suggesting that I should make this separation permanent?" "I'm suggesting that perhaps this is an opportunity to explore what life might look like with more independence. For both of you." "And what would the king think of this suggestion?" Lady Morrison shifted uncomfortably. "His Majesty is focused on his health right now. He needs space to concentrate on recovery without worrying about complications." "Complications." Camilla's voice was dangerously quiet. "Is that what our marriage has become?" "Of course not, Your Majesty. But surely you can see that the constant scrutiny of your relationship creates additional pressure during an already difficult time." After Lady Morrison left, Camilla walked through the empty house feeling more alone than she ever had. The advisors were making their position clear. They wanted her gone permanently, and they would use Charles's illness as justification. That evening, She did something she had promised herself she wouldn't do. She called Charles's private line. "Camilla?" His voice was full of relief and longing. "I needed to hear your voice," she said, tears flowing freely now that she was alone. "I've been going mad without you. The doctors say I should be feeling better, but I feel worse every day. Lady Morrison came to see me today. She made it very clear that they hope this separation becomes permanent." Charles was quiet for a long moment. "They've been saying similar things to me. They think that if I just focus on my duties and my health, everything will be better." "And do you believe them?" "I believe that without you, I'm not the man I need to be to lead this country. You make me stronger, not weaker." They talked for an hour, sharing their days, their fears, and their determination not to let others decide their future. But when they hung up, both of them felt the weight of the forces working against them. The next morning, Charles woke up feeling more energetic than he had in weeks. The conversation with Camilla had lifted his spirits in a way that no medical treatment had managed. He walked into his morning meeting with a new sense of purpose. "Sir Gerald," he said firmly, "I want to arrange a visit to Highgrove this weekend." "Your Majesty." The doctors strongly advised against any emotional stress during this critical period of treatment. "Speaking with my wife is not emotional stress. It's emotional support. There's a difference." "But Your Majesty, if the press discovers that you visited, it could undermine the entire purpose of this separation." Charles stood up from his desk. "The purpose of this separation was supposed to be my health. If my health is better when I'm with my wife, then logic dictates that I should be with my wife." Sir Gerald looked uncomfortable. "The palace advisors feel that it would be premature to end the separation so soon." "The palace advisors," Charles said slowly, "work for me, not the other way around." That afternoon, Charles called his doctor for a frank conversation. "Doctor, you said that stress was harming my recovery. But what if the separation itself is causing more stress than being together ever did?" The doctor was quiet for a moment. "Your Majesty, if you truly feel that the separation is worsening your condition, then we should reconsider the treatment plan. The goal is your health, not adhering to a specific approach if it's not working." For the first time in weeks, Charles smiled. The tide was beginning to turn, but he knew that the palace advisors would not give up easily. They had wanted this separation for their own reasons, and they would fight to maintain it. At Highgrove, Camilla was sitting in the garden when her phone rang. Charles's voice was different when she answered, stronger, more determined. "Pack your bags," he said. "You're coming home." The emergency meeting at Buckingham Palace was unlike anything the senior staff had ever experienced. Sir Gerald Whitmore sat across from King Charles, his face red with frustration. Lady Morrison tapped her pen nervously against her notebook. The palace doctor, Dr. Richardson, looked uncomfortable as he tried to explain his change of recommendation. "Your Majesty," Sir Gerald began, his voice tight with controlled anger, "this decision goes against months of careful planning. We convinced the press that the Queen Consort needed personal time away. If she returns now, there will be questions." Charles leaned back in his chair, calmer than he had felt in weeks. "Then we'll answer those questions honestly. We'll say that we realize the separation was not beneficial for either of us." "But Your Majesty," Lady Morrison interrupted, "the public is just beginning to accept that there might be problems in your marriage. This could be seen as weakness or indecision. Or it could be seen as a couple who loves each other enough to fight for their relationship." Charles replied, "I'm tired of letting other people define what strength looks like." Dr. Richardson cleared his throat nervously. "From a medical standpoint, Your Majesty's stress levels have actually increased during the separation. His blood pressure is higher, his sleep patterns are worse, and his overall mood has declined significantly." Sir Gerald turned to the doctor sharply. "But you said that emotional stress was dangerous for his condition." "I said that excessive stress was dangerous. But I'm learning that isolation from emotional support can be just as harmful as too much pressure. The king's health has declined during this separation, not improved." The room fell silent. The advisors had built their entire argument on medical necessity, and now that foundation was crumbling. "When will she return?" Lady Morrison asked, defeat clear in her voice. "Tomorrow," Charles said firmly. "I'm driving to Highgrove myself to bring her home." At Highgrove House, Camilla was packing with a mixture of joy and anxiety. She was thrilled to be returning to Charles, but she knew that their problems with the palace advisors were far from over. Mrs. Patterson helped her fold clothes, smiling for the first time since Camilla had arrived. The house hasn't been the same without both of you here, the housekeeper said. It needs both your voices to feel alive. Mrs. Patterson, Camilla said, what do you think about all this? Do you believe that Charles and I are bad for each other? The older woman stopped folding and looked directly at Camilla. Your Majesty, I've worked for the royal family for 30 years. I've seen relationships that were all for show and relationships that were real. What you and His Majesty have is real love. That's not something you throw away because some people in suits think it's inconvenient. The next morning, Charles drove himself to Highgrove in his favorite old Land Rover, leaving his security detail scrambling to follow. He had not felt this free in months. When he pulled up to the house, Camilla was waiting on the front steps, her suitcase beside her. They didn't speak at first. Charles got out of the car and walked to her, taking her hands in his. They stood there for a moment, just looking at each other, remembering why they had fought so hard to be together in the first place. Are you sure about this? Camilla asked. Going against the advisors won't be easy. I've never been more sure of anything, Charles replied. These past weeks have taught me that I would rather face any challenge with you than face anything without you. The drive back to London was peaceful. They talked about small things, the gardens, books they had read, plans for Christmas. But underneath the casual conversation was a shared understanding that they were entering a new phase of their relationship, one where they would have to fight harder to protect what they had built together. When they arrived at Buckingham Palace, word of Camilla's return had already spread through the staff. Some smiled and welcomed her warmly. Others looked worried about what this meant for the palace's carefully laid plans. The first test came that evening during the weekly senior staff meeting. Charles entered the room with Camilla beside him, making it clear that she was not just returning as his wife, but as his partner in ruling. Your Majesties, Sir Gerald said stiffly, we were not expecting the Queen Consort to join tonight's meeting. The Queen Consort will be attending all meetings from now on, Charles said calmly. I've realized that I make better decisions when I have her counsel. Lady Morrison looked like she had swallowed something sour. Your Majesty, there are matters of state security that require careful consideration of who is present. And I can think of no one whose discretion I trust more than my wife's, Charles replied. The meeting continued, but the tension was obvious. Every suggestion from the advisors was now met with input from both Charles and Camilla. Decisions that had been made by committee were now being made by the royal couple together. After the meeting, Sir Gerald asked to speak with Charles privately. Your Majesty, he said once they were alone, I fear that you're making a mistake. The separation was beginning to reduce public criticism of your relationship. Bringing the Queen Consort back so quickly will make it seem like the monarchy is unstable. Charles stood by the window looking out at the London lights. Gerald, do you know what I learned during these weeks apart? No, Your Majesty. I learned that a king who sacrifices his happiness for the approval of others is not a strong leader. He's a weak man who lets others make his most important decisions for him. But, Your Majesty, the monarchy has always required personal sacrifice for the greater good. Charles turned to face him. Yes, it has. But it has also required strong partnerships. My grandmother had my grandfather. My mother had my father for over 70 years. Why should I be expected to rule alone when history shows that the strongest monarchs had the support of strong marriages? Sir Gerald had no answer for that. That night, as Charles and Camilla sat together in their private sitting room, sharing tea and catching up on everything that had happened during their separation, they both knew that the real battle was just beginning. They won't give up easily, Camilla said. No, they won't. But we have something they don't understand. What's that? Charles smiled and took her hand. We have each other, and sometimes that's the strongest weapon of all. Outside their window, London slept, unaware that a quiet revolution was taking place in the palace. The king and queen consort had decided to fight for their love, and that decision would change everything. The palace was buzzing with whispered conversations. News of Camilla's sudden return had spread beyond the inner circle, and speculation was running wild. Some staff members were genuinely happy to see the royal couple reunited, while others worried about their jobs if they had shown too much support for the separation. 3 days after Camilla's return, the first newspaper article appeared. The headline read, Royal Marriage in Crisis? Queen Consort's mysterious return raises questions. The article speculated about health scares, marriage problems, and palace power struggles. Charles read the article over breakfast while Camilla sat across from him, calmly eating her toast. "They're determined to make this into a scandal," he said, folding the newspaper with frustration. "Let them," Camilla replied. "The people who matter know the truth. The rest will figure it out eventually." But the pressure was mounting from all sides. That morning's cabinet meeting was particularly tense. Several ministers expressed concern about the stability of the monarchy during uncertain times. "Your Majesty," said the Prime Minister during a private moment after the meeting, "I'm receiving questions from Parliament about the recent changes in the royal household. They're worried about consistency in leadership." Charles looked at the Prime Minister steadily. "Are you questioning my ability to lead?" "Of course not, Your Majesty. But some members are concerned about the perception of instability. The separation was seen as a mature response to public pressure. The sudden reversal is being interpreted differently." "And how is it being interpreted?" The Prime Minister looked uncomfortable. "Some see it as emotional decision-making rather than rational leadership." That evening, Charles called a meeting with his most trusted advisor, Lord Pemberton, who had been away during the separation and had just returned to the palace. "James," Charles said, using his old friend's first name as he did when they were alone, "give me your honest opinion. Am I making a mistake by fighting for my marriage?" Lord Pemberton, a man in his 70s who had served the royal family for decades, sat quietly for a moment before answering. "Charles, I've watched you grow from a young prince into a king. I've seen you make decisions based on duty, on public opinion, and on advice from others. But I've rarely seen you make decisions based on what you truly believe is right. And what do I truly believe is right? You tell me. But I will say this. The strongest kings in history were not the ones who abandoned their personal convictions for political convenience. They were the ones who found a way to honor both their public duties and their private truths." Meanwhile, Camilla was facing her own challenges. Several charity organizations that she had worked with for years were suddenly expressing concerns about their association with her during this uncertain time. Phone calls were not being returned, and invitations were being quietly withdrawn. Lady Sarah Thornfield, who had been Camilla's friend for over 20 years, came to visit. They sat in Camilla's private sitting room sharing tea and speaking honestly about the situation. "Camilla," Lady Sarah said gently, "people are scared. They don't understand what's happening, and they're worried about being associated with what they see as instability." "And what do you see it as?" Camilla asked. "I see it as a woman who loves her husband fighting for her marriage. But I'm your friend. Not everyone has that perspective. So what would you advise?" Lady Sarah was quiet for a moment. "I would advise you to do what you've always done. Be authentic. Be yourself. The people who truly know you will stand by you. The others? Well, perhaps they weren't really your friends to begin with." The turning point came during a state dinner with visiting dignitaries from several European countries. Charles and Camilla hosted together, and their genuine warmth and partnership were obvious to everyone present. The French president's wife, Madame Dubois, pulled Camilla aside during the reception. "Your Majesty," she said in accented English, "in France we have a saying, 'L'amour vrai ne se cache pas.' True love cannot be hidden. Anyone watching you and your husband tonight can see that what you have is real and strong." "Thank you," Camilla replied. "It hasn't been easy lately. The best things never are. But what you two have together, the way you support each other, the way you make each other stronger, that is what leadership looks like. Not the cold, separate existence some people think royalty requires." That night, after the guests had gone, Charles and Camilla walked through the palace gardens together. It was late October and the leaves were falling around them. "I've been thinking," Charles said, "about what we're really fighting for here. What conclusion have you reached? We're not just fighting for our marriage. We're fighting for the idea that authentic relationships make leaders stronger, not weaker. We're fighting for the possibility that the monarchy can be both dutiful and human." "That's a big fight," Camilla said with a small smile. "Yes, it is. Are you ready for it?" Camilla stopped walking and turned to face him. "Charles, I've been ready for this fight since the day I fell in love with you 30 years ago. The only difference now is that we're finally fighting it together instead of separately." The next morning brought unexpected good news. Dr. Richardson called with Charles's latest test results. "Your Majesty, I'm pleased to report that your health markers have improved significantly over the past week. Your blood pressure is down, your stress hormones are at normal levels, and your overall physical condition is better than it's been in months. Since my wife returned, Charles said. Yes, Your Majesty. It appears that the emotional support of your marriage is indeed beneficial for your health, not detrimental. Charles immediately called Sir Gerald to his office and shared the medical report. This proves definitively that the separation was the wrong approach, Charles said. My health is better with my wife by my side, not worse. Sir Gerald looked at the report, his face showing his frustration. Your Majesty, while this is certainly good news for your health, there are still political considerations. Gerald, Charles interrupted, I want you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to say. The political considerations you're worried about are based on the assumption that the public wants their leaders to be emotionally isolated and personally unhappy. I don't believe that's true. But Your Majesty, I'm not finished. I believe that people want leaders who are authentic, who show them that it's possible to honor both duty and love. I believe that showing strength in our marriage shows strength in our leadership. Charles stood up and walked to the window. I'm going to prove that theory. Tomorrow, Camilla and I are going to do a joint interview with the BBC. We're going to tell the truth about what happened and why. We're going to show the public that their king and queen consort are real people who love each other and who are stronger together than apart. Sir Gerald's face went pale. Your Majesty, that is extremely risky. If the public doesn't respond well, then we'll deal with that when it happens. But I refuse to live in fear of public opinion any longer. It's time to trust that honesty and authenticity are still valued in this world. That night, as Charles and Camilla prepared for the most important interview of their lives, they both knew that everything was about to change. They were about to bet their future on the belief that love, truth, and partnership were still virtues that people admired. It was a big gamble, but they were ready to take it together. The BBC television studio had never felt more charged with anticipation. Charles and Camilla sat across from veteran journalist Margaret Sinclair, who had covered the royal family for over 2 decades. The cameras were ready, the lighting was perfect, and the future of the monarchy felt like it was hanging in the balance. Your Majesties, Margaret began, thank you for agreeing to this interview. The public has been very curious about recent events. Can you tell us what really happened with the separation? Charles and Camilla exchanged a look. They had rehearsed this moment, but now that it was here, Charles decided to speak from his heart rather than from their prepared script. Margaret, I want to be completely honest with your viewers. I've been dealing with some health issues that required medical attention. My doctors and palace advisors believed that reducing stress in my life would help my recovery. They recommended that Camilla and I spend some time apart. And did you agree with this recommendation? Margaret asked. At first I thought I should trust the experts. But what I learned during those weeks apart was that being separated from my wife didn't reduce my stress. It increased it dramatically. Camilla spoke for the first time. We've been married for nearly 20 years and we've been companions for much longer than that. Asking us to live apart was like asking a person to function without half of their support system. Queen Consort, there have been suggestions that your relationship with the king creates additional pressure because of public scrutiny. How do you respond to that? Camilla smiled gently. Margaret, every royal marriage faces scrutiny. That's part of the role we've accepted. But we believe that facing that scrutiny together makes us stronger, not weaker. When Charles and I support each other publicly, we're showing the country that partnership and loyalty are values we believe in. Your Majesty, Margaret turned to Charles, some critics have suggested that your decision to end the separation shows emotional decision-making rather than rational leadership. How do you respond? Charles leaned forward slightly. I would argue that the most rational decision a leader can make is to surround himself with people who make him stronger and wiser. Camilla has been my closest advisor, my strongest supporter, and my most honest critic for decades. Cutting myself off from that support in the name of rational leadership would actually be quite irrational. Can you tell us about your health now? I'm happy to report that my health has improved significantly since Camilla returned. My doctors have confirmed that my stress levels are down, my blood pressure is normal, and I'm sleeping better than I have in months. It turns out that love and support are excellent medicine. Margaret asked several more questions about their work, their plans for the future, and their message to the public. But the moment that would be replayed on news programs around the world came near the end of the interview. Your Majesties, what would you say to people who believe that royal marriages should be more about duty than love? Charles and Camilla looked at each other, and something passed between them that the cameras captured perfectly. A look of understanding. Affection and shared purpose, I would say, Charles replied. That duty and love are not opposites. They strengthen each other. I am a better king because I have Camilla's love and support. She makes me more patient, more understanding, and more aware of how our decisions affect real people's lives, Camilla added. And I would say that showing the public an authentic, loving relationship teaches valuable lessons about commitment, forgiveness, and working through difficulties together. These are qualities that any society benefits from seeing in its leaders. The interview ended with Margaret asking if they had any regrets about the separation. I regret that we allowed other people's fears to override our own knowledge of what works for us, Charles said. But I don't regret that it happened, because it taught us how much we mean to each other and how important it is to trust our own judgment. When the cameras stopped rolling, the studio was unusually quiet. Margaret, who had interviewed hundreds of politicians and celebrities, seemed moved by what she had just witnessed. Your Majesties, she said, in 30 years of journalism, I've rarely seen two people speak with such honesty about their relationship. Whatever the public reaction, you should know that your authenticity came through clearly. The interview aired 3 days later on a Tuesday evening. Charles and Camilla watched it together in their private sitting room, holding hands and wondering how the public would respond. They didn't have to wait long. Within an hour of the broadcast, social media was buzzing with reactions. The palace staff monitored the responses carefully, preparing for either celebration or crisis. The first indication of public sentiment came from an unexpected source. The palace switchboard was flooded with calls, not complaints but messages of support. People calling to say they were moved by the interview, that they respected the king and queen consort more after seeing their genuine affection for each other. Your Majesty, Sir Gerald said the next morning, his voice showing his surprise. The public response has been overwhelmingly positive. The newspapers are calling it refreshingly honest and a masterclass in authentic leadership. Charles smiled. Sometimes people are wiser than we give them credit for. The positive reaction continued to grow throughout the week. Opinion polls showed increased support for the monarchy. Letters poured in from ordinary citizens sharing their own stories of how love and partnership had made them stronger in their work and personal lives, but perhaps the most meaningful response came from an unexpected source. Prince William called his father to the palace for a private conversation. Dad, William said, I watched the interview with Catherine, and we both wanted you to know how proud we are of you and Camilla. Thank you, William. That means a great deal. You taught me something important this week. You showed me that being king doesn't mean sacrificing everything that makes you human. It means being human in a way that inspires others. Charles felt tears forming in his eyes. I hope that's the lesson people take from this. I think it is. And Dad, I think Mum would have been proud of you too. You've shown that it's possible to honor the past while building something new and authentic. That evening, Charles and Camilla walked through the palace gardens as they had done so many times before. But this time something had changed. The weight of other people's expectations felt lighter. The fear of public criticism had diminished. Do you think we've won? Camilla asked. I think we've learned something more important than winning, Charles replied. We've learned that being true to ourselves and to each other is the strongest foundation we can build on. And the advisors who wanted us apart? Charles smiled. Sir Gerald actually apologized to me yesterday. He said he had underestimated both our relationship and the public's capacity for understanding authentic emotion. People are smarter than politicians think they are, Camilla said. Yes, they are, and they're hungrier for truth than we realized. As they walked, they could see lights in the windows of the palace staff quarters. Inside those rooms, people who had worried about their jobs, who had taken sides during the separation, were now relaxed and hopeful again. The palace felt like a home rather than a battlefield. So what happens now? Camilla asked. Now we get back to the work we were meant to do together. Leading by example, serving the people, and showing the world that love and duty can coexist beautifully. The separation that was meant to weaken them had ultimately made them stronger. The crisis that could have destroyed their marriage had instead proven its strength. And the public that some had thought would reject their authenticity had embraced it wholeheartedly. As they reached the palace doors, Charles turned to his wife with a smile. "Ready to change the world together?" "I've been ready for 40 years, Camilla replied. "I was just waiting for you to be ready too." 6 months after the interview that changed everything, Buckingham Palace had transformed from a place of whispered tensions into a center of renewed purpose. The king and queen consort had not only survived the crisis of their separation, but they had emerged as stronger leaders and a more united couple. The morning sun streamed through the windows of the private dining room where Charles and Camilla shared breakfast, as they had done every day since her return. The newspapers on the table told a story of a monarchy that had found its footing in authenticity rather than tradition alone. The Times is calling our visit to the flood victims. "Last week, a masterclass in compassionate leadership," Camilla said, reading over her teacup. "It's amazing how much more effective we are when we're working together," Charles replied. "I noticed how naturally you connected with those families. You have a gift for making people feel heard." The flood relief visit had indeed been remarkable. Charles and Camilla had spent 2 days in the affected areas, not just making ceremonial appearances, but rolling up their sleeves to help pack relief supplies and sitting with families who had lost their homes. The images of the royal couple working side by side, genuinely caring for their people, had resonated around the world. Sir Gerald entered the dining room with the morning briefing. His demeanor completely changed from the tense, worried man he had been during the separation crisis. "Your Majesties, I have several updates. First, the Australian Prime Minister has specifically requested that both of you attend the state visit next month. He mentioned that the partnership you demonstrate is exactly what his government hopes to emulate." Charles smiled. "6 months ago you would have advised against joint appearances." Sir Gerald looked slightly embarrassed. "Your Majesty, I owe you both an apology. I was so focused on avoiding controversy that I forgot the power of genuine leadership. The public response to your partnership has been extraordinary." "What kind of response?" Camilla asked. "Marriage counselors report that couples are coming to them saying they want relationships like yours, built on mutual support and honest communication. Youth organizations are asking for your involvement because young people see you as an example of how to balance personal happiness with professional responsibility." The transformation had indeed been remarkable. What had started as a crisis had become a movement. The royal couple's decision to be honest about their struggles and their love had given permission to others to be equally authentic in their own lives. Dr. Richardson arrived for Charles's monthly health checkup. The news continued to be excellent. "Your Majesty, all your health markers are not just normal, they're better than they've been in years. Your stress levels are low, your energy is high, and your overall well-being is excellent." "And you attribute this to?" Charles asked with a knowing smile. "To the fact that you're living in alignment with your values and surrounded by support. Medical science has proven again and again that strong relationships are one of the best predictors of health and longevity." After the doctor left, Charles and Camilla prepared for their afternoon engagement at a new community center. But first, they had a private meeting with Prince William and Catherine, who had requested time to discuss something important. "Dad, Camilla," William began, "Catherine and I have been talking about the changes we've seen in the monarchy over the past 6 months. The way you two have handled this crisis has changed how we think about our own roles." Catherine nodded. "We've seen how much stronger you are together, and how the public responds to authenticity. We want to make sure we're building our own partnership in the same way." "What do you mean?" Camilla asked. "We mean that we want to work together more, make decisions together, and show the public that the next generation of royals also believes in the power of partnership," William explained. Charles felt a surge of pride. That's exactly what the monarchy needs: continuity in values across generations. The community center visit that afternoon was typical of how Charles and Camilla had learned to work together. While Charles spoke with the center's directors about funding and policy, Camilla sat with teenagers in the mentorship program, listening to their stories and offering encouragement. When they came together for the official opening ceremony, they each brought insights from their separate conversations that made their joint remarks more meaningful and comprehensive. Later that evening, they attended a state dinner for visiting dignitaries. The evening was significant because it represented everything they had learned about working as a team. Charles handled the formal diplomatic conversations while Camilla focused on the cultural and social connections. But throughout the evening, they frequently consulted with each other, showing their guests that they valued each other's opinions and expertise. The French president, who had been present during some of their most difficult months, pulled Charles aside during the reception. "Your Majesty, I must tell you that my wife and I have watched your transformation with great admiration. What you and the Queen Consort have accomplished is remarkable. You've shown the world that leaders can be both strong and loving." "Thank you. It hasn't always been easy. The best things never are. But you've proven something important, that authenticity is more powerful than perfection." As the evening wound down, Charles and Camilla found themselves alone on one of the palace balconies, looking out over the London lights. "Do you ever think about where we'd be if we had given in to the pressure to stay apart?" Camilla asked. Charles considered the question. "I think we'd both be miserable, and I think the monarchy would be weaker for it. But more than that, I think we would have missed the opportunity to show people that love and duty can strengthen each other rather than conflict. The letters we receive suggest that we've given people permission to fight for their own relationships, yes, and to believe that they can be authentic in their professional lives too. That's a legacy I'm proud of." A year later, Charles and Camilla celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary with a private dinner at Highgrove House. The dining room was filled with flowers from their garden, and the table was set simply with their favorite china. 20 years, Camilla mused, and this year has been the strongest yet. "Because we learned to trust ourselves instead of letting others define our relationship," Charles replied. "And because we learned that fighting for each other is not selfish, it's necessary." They talked about their children, their work, their plans for the future. They talked about the books they were reading and the places they wanted to visit. They talked like the best friends they had always been, but with the added depth of having weathered a serious crisis together. "Charles," Camilla said as they walked through their garden after dinner, "do you think we've changed the monarchy permanently?" "I think we've shown that the monarchy can evolve without losing its essential purpose. We've proven that being human doesn't make leaders weaker. It makes them more relatable and more effective." "And the next generation?" "William and Catherine are building on what we've started. They're creating their own version of authentic partnership. The monarchy will be stronger because of it." As they stood in their garden, surrounded by the roses they had planted together years before, both Charles and Camilla felt a deep sense of peace. The crisis that had threatened to tear them apart had instead taught them the true strength of their bond. The palace that had once felt like a place of competing interest now felt like a home where love and duty coexisted naturally. The public that had once been skeptical of their relationship now saw them as an example of enduring partnership. Most importantly, they had learned that being true to themselves and to each other was not just personally fulfilling. It was the foundation of the kind of leadership the world needed. "Ready to head inside?" Charles asked. "Ready," Camilla replied, taking his hand. As they walked back to the house they had made their sanctuary, they knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The separation that was meant to weaken them had ultimately proven that their love was unbreakable, and their partnership was the source of their greatest strength. The silence that had once filled the palace with tension was now filled with contentment. They had won more than just the right to be together. They had won the right to be themselves, and in doing so, they had shown the world a new model of authentic leadership built on love, partnership, and unwavering commitment to each other.